and welcome everybody to yet another Monsido powered by Civic Plus webinar. Today we're gonna focus on the do's and the don'ts of website accessibility, and we're gonna mention some of those. We frame them as 7 common mistakes that website managers or web teams are making when working on web accessibility. The date is 12th of October, and let's kick it in with quick housekeeping rules. As usually, you know, Zoom is providing live transcriptions. You're already probably seeing it on your screen. If you're not, you're welcome to use them. Otherwise, the recording of this webinar most probably will be sent to your inbox in the beginning of next week with closed captioning, edited. And of course, the slides that we are showing today will be also shared in this email. As you already started using the chat, please utilize the chat meanwhile we are speaking. If there is something that you don't understand, you want this to be explained in a different way, or maybe there is something that we can add on as an add explanation, please use the chat so we are able to answer you and provide you the most valuable information we can. And as of today, I'm gonna be the host and the moderator of the webinar. My name is Graciela Jalova. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, I worked for the marketing team at Monsido as a revenue marketing manager, and I have been working on websites for the last, I don't know, 7-8 years, working in different teams and probably sitting in the same challenges that you are sitting today, and have experienced almost everything when it comes to updates and website projects. So I will be happy to share my knowledge. And for those of you who are up to sparring, please add me on LinkedIn. I'm always up for a chat. And for the presenter today, it will be my lovely colleague, Lars. So I will give you a little short time to introduce yourself, Lars.
Yeah, thanks, Graciela. So I'm Lars, and I'm a part of the product team in Monsido, which basically means that I'm a part of the team who is permanently building and improving the accessibility checks we are doing in our platform. Before I came to Monsido, I spent quite a few years in accessibility consulting. So I worked with a lot of different teams, mostly in public sector organizations, but really all kinds of web and digital teams aimed at better accessibility. And it's some of the learnings from all these teams I want to share today. Also, I want to mention that I'm a blind screen reader user myself, so I cannot really see what's on my screen. I have everything in my ears. Yeah, so that's just a side note for now I wanted to share, but yeah,
I will do my best to sorry to interrupt you. I will do my best to read the chat for you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Graciela. And also, you are welcome to connect or reach out on LinkedIn if you like.
Great. And let's step a bit in the agenda. Quickly, I will go to mark some of the important reasons why you should focus on web accessibility. And then most of you probably already know, but for those of you who doesn't know, WCAG 2.2 is finally here. It's been released last week. So we'll go a little bit quickly to show you what's the new thing, and we'll share some resources with you. And then together with Lars, we will go around those 7 common do's and don'ts that we see web accessibility teams or web teams are making when they're working on web accessibility. As a wrap up, I will share some very useful resources that we have prepared for you. And of course, we'll read everything that comes from the chat, and we'll go to the Q&A session at the end. As a very start, let's feel how the attendance is today to measure your pulse with the first poll. We're just curious to know, have you already started working on your web accessibility, or you are yet about to start? I know some of those of you who are already in the public sector, you're probably already so much ahead of it, but there will be probably some of you who work in the private sector who are yet about to start. So we just want to measure the pulse of the attendance rate so we know that we are staying relevant to the things we are saying to you. And I'll just give it a few more seconds. And it's totally fine, no matter where you are in your journey. It's totally fine. We are doing those webinars exactly for that reason. We want to include everybody, even if you have not even done anything yet on web accessibility, or if you're already so much ahead in your journey. I think most of the people have answered, so I'm just going to end the poll and share the results with you. Around 43% of you have been started a long time ago, and you are feeling that you're on the right track. Congrats to those of you. Of course, we hope that we can still contribute a little bit of information with this webinar to those of you who feel that they're on the right track, but still have something to learn from this webinar. Some of you already tackling some very or most important things from the issue. That's 30% of you, and 25% of you are focusing more on the future accessibility of your website. This is also totally fine. We hope that there will be a little bit for everybody here, and just 3% or one person have answered that have not started their journey yet. So let's kick it in with the reasons of why accessibility is important and why it should be on your radar if it's not. As we saw earlier in the poll, most of you are already aware, but it's always nice to repeat the reasons why. And if you have attended some of our webinars, and if you have read some of our content, you probably have seen that we say that accessibility benefits everyone. It's not just for people who have accessibility challenges, or it makes online content meets everybody's needs, not only the accessibility requirements. But I just want to give some quick examples of, for example, people who are having hearing disabilities or hearing impairments. They read the captions of videos, or they are listening to the sound, but they're not reading the captions. But for other people who are not able to listen to the audio, captions are very important. But such people not always have to have disabilities. For example, reading a captions for a video when the environment is very noisy, or when your baby is sleeping, is also benefits the rest of the users. Maybe adjusting the color contrast for color blindness could also benefit those who are entering a very dark room or a very bright room. So this contrast still contributes to their experience. Also, reading the transcript of a presentation to enforce that information learning. Sometimes you are reading and listening to this at the same time, and you're able to grasp, at least that's for me. When I was studying Danish, for example, I will do both things. I will listen to Danish and I will read the subtitles so I can reinforce the information. I will learn even more and even faster. Also, people not always use the mouse. Maybe their mouse is broken. Maybe don't have a mouse available at the moment. Maybe their trackpad on their computer is currently not working. So making sure that your website is able to be navigated by a keyboard is also benefiting everybody. Bear in mind that accessibility is just the right thing to do. It allows people with disabilities to actively participate in our society and in our organizations, but it also speaks very loudly to what kind of organizations you are today. It makes you look more inclusive and therefore much more professional in the outsider eyes. Also, those of you who are preaching and advocating for accessibility are seen as innovators and progressive organization leaders. So enforcing that it is the right thing to do, and it's not something that we're doing because they are requirements to be done. It makes you set the standard for your organization to think accessibility first, instead of using it as a post factor when, okay, we are seeing some errors and some content mistakes being flagged by web accessibility checks. Setting this standard for your organization will also help you update your content before publishing, the same way you do with your normal content auditing before publishing, for checking the typos, checking the misspellings. The same thing goes for accessibility. You would like to know if the alt text is featured just before publishing, so you don't have to do it post when the errors are appearing. And then at the end of the day, it is the law. Compliance is here to stay. We see it developing even more with the developing of technology, and it's now the time to act. Some of you who are already, as I said early, working in the public sector, you're probably very familiar with the European Web Accessibility Directive from 2016. Also for UK organizations, you still are ratified by the same directive. So you're probably very familiar that you have to comply with those legal regulations, and you're already enforcing them. For those of you who are working in the private sector, it's yet about to be something very relevant for you. The European Accessibility Act have already been somehow discussed in the accessibility community, and we know that it's very soon coming, rather sooner than later. You should already getting familiar of what are the requirements for the European organization in the private sector. And also for those of you who are maybe not based in European organizations, but you are still handling and trading, and you're partnering with European organizations, this act is also like you need to live to those standards as well. And the W3C is continuing all the time working on web accessibility standards. We're going to mention the WCAG 2.2, but it will be a keep on living on new expectations and new standards that they will be published in the future. So knowing that there will be a somehow international standards that most of the legal legislations will refer to, or they will base their legal criteria on it. It's very obvious that accessibility is here to stay. And with that being said, let's briefly talk a little bit the exciting news about the WCAG 2.2. It's been a long-awaited thing that our team, and also I'm sure many of you who work on web accessibility, have been waiting to see what will be the new criteria and new checks. And we're just briefly gonna share a little bit here what is the new thing in WCAG 2.2. And it comes with 9 new criteria, 2 A checks, 4 double A checks, and 3 triple A checks. We have like a webinar that's not webinar, but a blog post and a webinar that goes around those criteria in a very detailed manner. I will share that with you, but we agreed here with Lars that he will share his highlight, and that is the criteria 2.5.8, the target size. So can you give a little bit of a context and maybe an example? Lars?
Yeah, thank you, Graciela. And I think we had a couple of questions already in the chat, people asking about if this is being recorded and sent out. Yes, it is. And also if we share the slides, and Graciela, I suppose we do.
Yes.
Yeah, good.
You haven't, it's just a weekend approaching, so
yeah,
don't expect them to be on Friday, but maybe Monday, Tuesday.
Good. So just quickly about WCAG 2.2, or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.2, and we're just mentioning this now because this is an update to the accessibility standard, and we've been waiting for this. Many people have been waiting for this for a couple of years, more or less, and the new version just came out last week, so that's just why we want to mention it here today. So we have these new 9 new success criteria. So it basically builds on top of WCAG 2.1, which is what the legislation in most of the EU points at today. So what it means is not that we have something completely new. It's not that everything changed. It's just that we have 9 new things to look out for now that we get to the version 2.2. But also I want to mention this is not a legal requirement yet. This is just the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is kind of behind the legislation. So even though the Web Accessibility Standards is updated now, it will probably take quite a bit of time before the laws, they actually follow up and start pointing at the new version. That said, I think now we know what the new standard looks like. So if I were to start a new web project today, even though it's not a legal requirement yet, I would definitely look into the new version of the WCAG standard, because I'm pretty certain it will become legal requirements in the future. And I just want to point out one of these 9 new things we have in there, which is the target size, and it's just to give you kind of an idea about what is new. So up until now, there were not really any requirements regarding how big a hit target. So what is a hit target? That could be something you need to click or tap on your mobile screen, like a button, for example. That would be an obvious example. It could be more or less any size up until this, but now there's a minimum requirement. It has to be at least 24 by 24 pixels. And why is that? Well, obviously, if you're someone who have like problems with your fine motor skills, if you can't very precisely control your hand or finger movements, it can be very difficult to hit very small targets on your touch screen, for example. So obviously for these users, it's better to have like a bigger hit target to aim at, basically, so you don't hit the wrong button really when you want to do something. But as Graciela said in the beginning, I mean, these accessibility things, they sometimes are must-have for people with disabilities, but they are also just a pretty good idea for anyone. And for this one, for example, right now in our part of the world, the winter is coming up, and I guess most of you can probably relate to how is it to be outside in the cold weather. You have freezing cold hands, and suddenly you need to press something on your touch screen and you barely can't feel your fingers, or you are just wearing big gloves to protect your hands against the cold weather. Suddenly it's very difficult if you have these very small hit target. And also, so that's just like a context where you can find yourself in where it would be beneficial also for you probably to have these bigger hit targets basically in your applications. Yeah. So that's just one example of what we have coming up in the new version of the WCAG standard.
Yeah, those winter gloves with the touch fingers are very smart, but still we need a size enough so we are able to click exactly where we want to click instead of somewhere around. Sometimes buttons are also very close to each other and there's almost barely space in between them. But yeah, let's see how that will develop. I'm curious. This is something also for me. I would love to see it in reality. I see the people are writing questions in the Q&A. Just to let you know, we will answer them in the end. I'm not gonna forget that. So let's step into the 7 do's and don'ts when working on web accessibility, and also what are our recommendations of how to work with them. And the first one is to have a strategy. Accessibility won't happen by accident or a good intention only. So maybe Lars, you can give your
thanks. I'm going to say something about that one. And what I mean by this is really like most other big things you want to achieve, or in other domains, it's a pretty good idea to actually have some kind of strategy or idea about how you want to achieve what you are going for. And sometimes I must say, I've seen people being, it seems like people sometimes tend to be a little bit naive towards this, and I don't know why it is. Maybe it is that I think intuitively, when people they hear about accessibility, intuitively, it sounds like the right thing to do, and people they just say, yes, we want to do that, accessibility, that makes sense, we want to do it. And then the next day, another 50 emails hits in the inbox, and all the good intentions just went out the window. And so therefore, just like all other things you want to achieve, it's a really good idea to have some kind of strategy around it. And accessibility strategy is not really much different from, I mean, all other kinds of strategies. There are certain elements that are good to think about. So definitely, I mean, I would start by thinking about and preferably write down, actually, why do we want accessibility? So, I mean, one thing is to just say we want accessibility, but it's much better to actually understand why is it that we want accessibility. Is it because there's a legal requirement? Basically, we are afraid we will get penalized if we are not accessible. That's one reason, and it's a completely fair reason. It's just good to be clear if that's why we are doing it. Is it because we want more customers or users to be able to use our website? I mean, that's another why for having accessibility. Or it could actually be that the type of, like, our type of organization, maybe our main target group is people who just happens to have special needs. It could be that we are an organization that are especially targeted towards elderly people, for example, and there could be some very good reasons for being accessible towards the needs that these people may have. So basically just understanding why is it actually that we want to have accessibility. And then having some proper goals set. I think it makes sense to set goals. I think that makes sense for people. But again, it does not make a lot of sense just to have a goal saying we want to be accessible. Because being accessible, that may mean something to me, and it may mean something slightly different to Graciela and something different to all of you. So being more clear about what is the goal actually, what do we mean when we say that we want to be accessible? So is it that we want to comply with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines version 2.1 level AA, for example? That could be one more specific interpretation of just being accessible, but it could also be that we want to have some kind of measure of how good is actually the user experience on our website for people with disability needs. And that's not necessarily the same as just meeting the WCAG or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So these could be different. It could also be that you have some kind of, I mean, if you already have some monitoring, measuring tools in place in your organization. It could be, for example, if you're using something like the Monsido accessibility scanner, there you will get what we refer to as the accessibility score. So if you're using something like that, it could also be more specific, like over the next 18 months, we want to see our accessibility score go up by 10% every 6 months. Something more specific like that, but just in any case, something that is just more specific than we want to be accessible, because that's just too fluffy to aim at, basically.
Or measurable. We call them SMART goals,
yeah.
Goals you can measure.
Yeah, thanks, Graciela. Then also you really need to consider something about your resources in your strategy, because again, back to the thing about being a little bit naive. Sometimes people say, yes, we want to, I've seen a lot of people saying, yes, we definitely want to be accessible, but, and then it stops there. They don't start thinking about, but how about the resources? How about the skills needed? How about the money needed? How about the people hours needed? If we want to start throwing people or money or something after accessibility, what is it then that we don't throw our resources after? And yeah, so just the awareness about actually, or the consideration, what kind of resources do we actually have and want to spend on this? It's not always the easiest and the nicest talk to have, but if you don't have it, it's just, I mean, you can't do much completely without resources. And then do have some kind of proper plan that an action plan that you want to follow. I often see people start by getting some kind of accessibility assessment, accessibility test, get their website scans for accessibility. And it's definitely a good starting point. But some people, or in some organizations, I see it just kind of stops after that. And well, yeah, you need to know where do we have the problems on our website, but just to know where your problems are, that does not really change anything for your end user. You once you have your accessibility scan or your assessment or whatever you call it, you need to make a decent action plan on how do we actually start to tackle these things. And again, it may seem obvious, but I've just seen it so many times that people kind of stop after they get the first accessibility report. You need to make the plan to get on from there.
Maybe just like every project, like whatever is the most complicated thing that your web accessibility scan have discovered, start with the most complicated, tackling those most complicated and things that they are showing as errors on your website, and then continue to those that they are a little bit more executional and they need checks on, and then proceed with the small ones. All have like an action plan that says, okay, we want to tackle all accessibility issues on our top 10 pages or top 20 pages that they've been mostly visited from our users, and then tackle the rest chunk by chunk. But yeah,
I think that's a pretty good approach to say, for example, we only start by our 10 most visited pages plus our front page or something like that. I would not necessarily recommend to start with the most difficult ones, and I'll get back to that in a little while. But it could definitely be a good idea to basically take a sample of your most visited pages and start by that. That could make a lot of sense. But in any case, just understand what is actually your plan for tackling this. Will you take us to the next slide, Katja?
Yeah, the next one is number 2, and it's talks about realistic expectations. So be realistic that accessibility takes time and resources. Yeah.
And so sometimes when people start working on the accessibility, I think sometimes people are missing a little bit of patience. And I mean, on one hand, it's a good thing. They have a lot of drive. They want to do a lot of things very fast. But I think it's just important to actually understand and respect that some of these things just takes a lot of time in reality. And it comes down to, well, there are things that you can that are within your control, but in most cases you will find that there are things that are partially out of your control or completely out of your control. And that if you don't have that awareness, it can be quite perhaps
demotivating.
Yeah, you can get demotivated once you hit these walls where you actually have things that you cannot really control. So I think it's just a really good idea to have that awareness and have a little bit of respect about that. It's okay that it actually takes time to do these things. And so one thing you would need, for example, probably you most likely you will need knowledge and new skills in your team, and that's probably within your control. It will take some time and it will cost some money, most likely, or some other resources, but it's probably within your control. But then, how about if you have content, for example, from other teams or from some external organizations feeding content into your website? That's quite common in many organizations that you actually have someone outside of your team or organization who are feeding content into your website. It's not necessarily the case that you can just go and knock on their door and say, hello, we want to be accessible by tomorrow. So please make sure that everything you send to us is completely accessible from next Monday morning. That in reality, that just I just don't see it happen that way. It may take a long time and good dialogues with these external partners to actually get them to bring accessible content into your website, if that's the case. It could also be that you have some external vendors creating stuff for you. Perhaps you're paying some external companies to produce a video for you, or to produce infographics for you, or some modules used on your website, and they may just not be ready for accessibility yet. Of course, you need to have the dialogue with them and tell them about your requirements for future deliveries, but in most cases, it's not something you can expect that they can just change over a couple of days. The good example here, I would say, is something like many of you could probably relate to have a cookie consent box on your website, or to have a chat function on your website. In many cases, these are like third-party modules, something you go out and buy externally somewhere. And sometimes they are not accessible, and you can just not, I mean, it's not something you can just force to be accessible within a couple of days. You can ask them questions and you can say you need to fix this, but it may also be, and I mean, ultimately you can change to another vendor, but even in that case, you may have a contract running for the next year or something before you can do that change, if that's the way you want to go.
And if we should step to the next one,
yeah,
number 3. So don't see accessibility as a 3-month project. Just like, be realistic. Your website is a living and dynamic thing, and so it is with your accessibility.
Yeah, and this one is a little bit of a follow-up to the other one, but with a slightly different perspective, because what I mean here, often when I went out to teams starting up in accessibility, they often saw accessibility as just a one-time project. So I often heard this story about, okay, now we want to do accessibility. We are very motivated. We decided that during Q3, we will tick off accessibility. And then after Q3, we'll be completely done with everything accessibility. And again, just to be realistic here, accessibility, that's an ongoing thing. Just like, I mean, you most likely you have other tasks that are ongoing tasks in your web team. That could be your search engine optimization work. That could be your security work. You have all these things that you keep doing on your website, and accessibility that has the same kind of nature, because at least as long as as long as you are updating your website with new content, you will keep. You'll have to keep ensuring that your new content is accessible. You need to monitor that somehow. Even if you imagine you have a website that does not really update on the content, as we just talked about earlier, sometimes it actually does happen that the web accessibility standards, they update. So at least that way around, there may be needs for continuous work now and then. That's it. In many cases, it can be a good idea to have like a big accessibility project from the beginning to get up to level, but just be aware it's not something that you will just tick off as finished. Accessibility is an ongoing thing. Yeah. Will you take the next one, Graciela?
Yeah. And the next one is number 4. So start early. It saves you money and it gives you much more better results.
Yeah.
Obvious, but still.
Yeah. So the idea here,
for those who haven't started yet, this is the best tip that we can give.
Yeah, definitely. I like to talk about this like just to have the picture of a physical building where you have an elevator for people in wheelchairs to get like up to the first floor, second floor, etc. If you build a new building and you design that new building with the elevator included, it fits perfectly fine in there. But if you have an old building and you want to put the elevator into the old building, it can give a really ugly result because from the beginning, the blueprint or the foundation for that building, it was not designed at all for the elevator. So you need to do really weird things inside the construction to get it to work, and most likely it will not be like a very beautiful solution you will get anyway. And it's really the same talking about the accessibility on your website. And I know it's not always you can follow this advice, because many of you have living websites that where you need to consider your accessibility. But for those of you who are to launch a new website within the next half year, 1 year, 2 years or something, it's so important that you are aware about the accessibility right from the beginning. Some of the things you can do is something that I would really recognize is, as soon as you start having the first test versions of your website running on a test server, for example, to start doing some accessibility scans at that time, for example, because it's so much easier to have the discussion with your vendor when it's early in the development process and say, okay, we can actually scan and see we have some accessibility errors, so we need to talk about that. It's much more difficult to have that dialogue once your website is launched and out in production, and everybody thought they were actually more or less done with the project, and then we start talking about accessibility at that time. But even earlier than that, a lot of things can actually be accounted for even before you start programming, or even before the developers start programming the website. For example, something about color contrast. That's even before you start coding anything in your website. The designers need to figure out what colors do we use, what contrasts do we have. And I have definitely seen some examples where this was not considered from the beginning. There were nice designs done with like really light pastel colors for all the text and stuff like that. And I've seen some really something that ended up as, I would say, really ugly examples, because suddenly, for example, I've seen some info boxes with some light background colors, which suddenly had to change to something very dark, which completely ruined these pastel color designs, because this was only considered afterwards. And it's just, if you only realize once your website is out in production, well, you can change the colors, but what was supposed to be a really nice looking design can end up, not being that nice to look at, because you didn't think of this from the beginning. So yeah, if you can,
should we go further?
If you can, put all the accessibility thoughts as early in your project as possible. Yeah, let's go to the next one.
And number 5, we don't have it, just don't leave it as a single person or a single team to handle accessibility in your organization. Accessibility in general requires to work across different teams, and maybe the whole organization even have to have this accessibility in mind.
Yeah, and so this is, I've so often talked to teams who were given commanded to have the responsibility for accessibility, but they were not really in control of all of it. And people just need to understand that you cannot just put the responsibility for accessibility in one place. Well, you can have someone who looks over everything and is responsible for that, but I've so often been out talking to either web development teams or design teams. And so let's say I'm out in a web development team, and they've been given the responsibility of making the website accessible, and then within the first 10 minutes or something of the dialogue we have, then we suddenly realize, okay, but these developers, they cannot really ensure accessibility, because what they get over from the design team does not really build up to an accessible website. And also the other way around, sometimes the responsibility is given to the design team, but they don't really have any control on how do the front-end developers actually go and implement it in the code. So people need to talk together. And another version of this, I've sometimes talked to web leaders or webmasters in, for example, in municipality websites, and they do all the best they can to make their websites accessible. And then suddenly some requirement from the political part of the organization, it could be suddenly you have a demand from the mayor's office because now they created this amazing brand new vision for the city, and they didn't, and it's published in a nice 20-page project plan or something, and suddenly they just demand this to go on the website no matter what, and nobody thought about accessibility when it was first created. So yeah, in that case, again, I mean, everybody involved need to have some kind of understanding of what it takes to put these things together. Yeah. Will you take the next one, Graciela?
Then we go to the number 6. We are almost wrapping it up. So number 6 is start with something that you can control and you can handle. So you don't feel overwhelmed by the tasks and the complexity of the magnitude of the tasks that probably your website report or scan have revealed.
Yeah. And that's back to when I commented on you, Graciela, starting about the most difficult one. I mean, you definitely need some kind of way to prioritize what you do, but also actually be careful that you don't get paralyzed because it's too overwhelming what you choose to start on. And what I mean by this is, I've often heard things like people, when they're starting out, they say, okay, we calculated that we have 5,000 images on our website, and that it would probably take about 3 months to make text alternatives for these images. And that's just not realistic, so people just stop there. But they don't realize that perhaps only 10% of the images even need text alternatives, but because the other 90%, they are decorative images which don't need text alternatives. But if you don't get to that point, you can easily just paralyze yourself because you get overwhelmed by that kind of task. A similar one I've often heard is something like, but we have 800 PDF documents on our website, and there's just no way we can afford to have all of these 800 PDFs remediated. And then people never really get to realize, but okay, it's maybe only 10 or 15 of these 800 PDFs that are actually ever clicked by anyone. So something like, looking into the statistics and see all these things we have, are they actually ever used by anyone? And maybe just, do a proper cleanup before you even consider what kind of resources it would take to make the important ones accessible. Yeah. The last one I have here is something about screen readers, because often people, when they start doing accessibility, they think they need to go testing with screen readers. And yeah, it can be a really good idea to test with a screen reader, but if people get stuck in the accessibility work by saying something like, we cannot afford to buy a screen reader to do proper testing, and then if people, yeah, there are many other things that are much more basic, and completely free to do. So just testing with a keyboard, for example, testing if you can zoom in with your browser. These are much more basic and much more relevant checks to do. So not that it's not important to test with a screen reader if you can do it, but there are many other things you should start doing before even considering spending all your resources on buying and learning screen reader testing, I would say.
Yeah.
The last one, I think it is.
Yeah.
Graciela, will you take that one?
Number 7, include a real user feedback. And just what you mentioned earlier, some people are getting very enthusiastic into testing a screen reader and testing their website via a screen reader, but using real user feedback can be both learning and inspiring experience for your team and your organization as a whole.
Yeah, and I include this one because what I've seen many times is, as soon as people can actually relate to real people when they start working on accessibility, it's much easier to stay motivated for the work. Most people, people, they want to do meaningful work, and most people, they just do not get very inspired by just ticking off legal requirements. But if you have the chance of actually including some real users in your accessibility work, now and then do some kind of user testing session with people using assistive technologies. That could be screen readers, but that could be a lot of other things also. That is just, one thing, there's a lot of learning in this. You can learn a lot from this, but the other thing, it's just much more inspiring for you doing your accessibility work when you actually see that it does improve something for real people. I've had in Denmark, for example, most municipalities here in Denmark, they have what they call a disability council, which is basically a group of people with disabilities advising the municipality. And when I've worked with municipalities who included this disability council, that's often when I've seen some really good results, because they kept getting real user feedback, like every 3 months or every 6 months or something. So if you have that opportunity, I think that's a pretty good idea. But again, if you can't think of any way you can include users, don't make that a roadblock for doing any accessibility work at all. But if you have the opportunity, it can be a really good idea to include people here. Yeah. User
testing is always a good thing, no matter if it's just for your user experience as a general users or for web accessibility. It's some of the most useful learnings are coming from there.
Yeah.
And
sure.
To wrap up, I just want to understand like we shared with you a lot of information all the time, and you can see it on our website as well. But we're curious to understand what you actually need. What kind of resources could help you where you're standing today to tackle web accessibility? Maybe you need something more to understand the WCAG requirements and how to apply them, something more practical. Maybe you need accessibility checklist that you can share towards all of your organizations. So also external content creators or content contributors, they can follow this checklist and making sure that they're providing a piece of content that is, okay, it's answering our accessibility needs, so they can tick the boxes. Maybe some kind of a practical playbook that can help you tackle accessibility, or something else. Maybe some of you who are already so much ahead in your accessibility journey, you need something else of a resource that can help you out. Please share that in the chat, and we'll make sure that we can work on such a collateral to help you along the way. And then with that being said, I see most of the people are voting, which is wonderful. I just want to share some of those resources that we already have on our website that you are able to use today. And we group them a little bit in a few categories. The WCAG 2.2 blog and a webinar that we dedicated, as I told you, in the blog post, we explained all the 9 criteria, how to apply them with some small examples, and how to use them. We have those accessibility tools completely for free on our website that you can check your color contrast. If you are working in a new mock-up design, in a new design for a new website, you can already test your color palettes over there. Are they having enough contrasts according to AA or AAA requirements? Also, we have the accessibility statement generator, where you can create a general message for your website that you're already working towards accessibility, to let people give a feedback when they are experiencing something that is inaccessible, so that you are able to receive a feedback right away on something that they flag for you. Also, the accessibility resources that we have available, it's the business accessibility business case template that Lars, my colleague Jasmine, and another accessibility expert, Miriam, they have built it together, a business case template to help those of you who are yet about to start on accessibility to convince your higher leadership. What is the business case around accessibility, how much it will cost us, what are the reasons why we should do it, and what are the points that we need to follow for our organizations to become accessible. Also, we have this very practical accessibility handbook that could be the handbook of accessibility for your organization. We have it printed out in our office and we distribute it to most of the conferences that we go around. It's a very useful piece of tool with all the things you need to know about accessibility. And of course, we have more specific to content creators, developers, designers, managers, those checklists. Download those checklists and try to and distribute them to, for example, if you have external content creators, that you can keep them aligned with what your requirements are as the minimum education for them to understand what kind of accessibility checks they need to follow. And then, of course, as well as this webinar and all previous our webinars, they will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. So follow our YouTube channel as well to be able to watch the recordings. And with that being said, I just want to understand to those of you who are already into working on web accessibility, we would love to help you out. Maybe we have already a 2.0 draft version on our Monsido tool that we can scan your websites towards. So we will help you understand how far are you on compliance with WCAG 2.2. Maybe you have not yet started on web accessibility and you want to understand where your website stands today. So we are offering a free accessibility scan. 500 pages of your website could be scanned on that, so you can get a little bit more of an overview where you stand today and how much work you have to work towards. And also, Monsido is not only about accessibility. Monsido provides all kinds of performance metrics and helps with SEO, with content quality assurance. So we can show you how our platform can maybe replace some of the tools that you're using today. Instead of using multiple tools, you can use one and combine them together with web accessibility. Or maybe you're just curious to have all those things together. So I'm going to leave that poll for a little bit. Meanwhile, we go to the Q&A session. And Lars, I can see the first question comes from Robin. He asked about something. Will Monsido be updated to include the latest WCAG checks? And if so, by when? I assume you work already with the product team on that, so you have a little bit of a clarity of when is that happening. I know it's already cooking.
Yeah, definitely the question is yes. And to be completely honest, I'm not sure if it is actually out in public right now, but at least it's very close to. It's not that I mean, it's not that you will have to wait another half year or something. We've been working on this along the development of the standard. So just up until last week, when the final version of the WCAG criteria, they were finally published. I mean, for a long time we have known more or less what is coming. There were some minor changes, but we have prepared our platform for this. And to be honest, I'm not exactly sure if it's launched right now, but it's very close to, at least.
It's very close to. And Robin, if you're on our if you're a customer of ours, I assume you are, since you're asking, you will receive an email, official email, when it's officially launched. I know that the product team are very close to launching it. And then we have some other questions of Oh, Catherine is offering here a screen reader Chrome extension. Very nice piece of advice over here. And is there Robert is asking, is there a minimum target size for A, AA, or AAA?
That's what we will have with the new WCAG 2.2, as we talked about. There we will have on that's on level AA in the new WCAG 2.2. There you'll get the minimum target size requirement.
And then we have, of course, the slides will be available in the recording just in the beginning of next week, most probably on our YouTube channel, and also will be landing in your inboxes. But Hannah over here is asking how to get other departments to think about accessibility and discuss it before speaking to the web team, a bit like the municipal department example you gave.
Yeah. I think it's a really good idea to make a broad perspective on accessibility. So one thing, I mean, well, obviously, if you have the opportunity to bring in someone who is really affected by this, if you could, for example, if you could find a blind screen reader user and bring the person into a live demo, just showing people what is it actually to navigate your website without being able to see it, that's a big, usually that's quite a big eye opener for many people. But the other way to go, which is just as good, I would say, that is really to open people's eyes for how many people this is affecting, because in general, many people tend to think it's only a few people with disabilities, but to open up people's mind for who else is affected, just the fact that, for example, 8% of all men, they are red-green colorblind, 8% of all men. That's quite a lot. If, like, let's say, for example, your infographics, they use red-green color to show something important information, and then you're basically blocking out 8% of the male population. But also the examples you gave, Graciela, on how video, like it's a WCAG requirement to have captions on your videos, and I mean, most people can actually relate to why it's nice to have captions. That's, I mean, for people who can't hear anything, it's a must. It's a must-have to have captions. You can't do anything with a video if you can't hear anything. But I think most people can relate to how it's nice to have the captions if you are watching it in the train or in the office where you don't want to disturb other people's stuff like that. So there are a lot of good ideas on how you can open up so it gets a much broader perspective and how people can suddenly see themselves in accessibility.
Yeah, I know in our organizations, in our organization here in Monsido Powered by Civic Plus, we try to host those web accessibility champions network, where people can voluntarily come and brainstorm ideas of if they have experienced something on their daily work that they want to enforce accessibility, but they are questioning like how to do it, or if it's the right way they're doing it currently. So maybe hosting such workshops or distributing some information across your organization, not necessarily the department that it's working on the website, but maybe we're talking a lot about PowerPoint slides and how to make those accessible, for example, PDFs, documents, all those collaterals that you work on a daily basis.
That's a good one. And actually, Graciela, when we started up that one, it started by, I went out scouting a little bit for people in other teams in our organization who, I mean, it's completely fair that not everybody gets accessibility right from the beginning, but usually in most teams, there are some people who early on get the idea about accessibility, who do think it's a good idea. So go a little bit around in the organization and see if you can figure out who are the people who are most likely to be interested in accessibility, and perhaps form like a small network of these people where you can start discussing accessibility issues, and they will be like the advocates for accessibility within their own teams. So that can be a good way to go.
Yeah. And I think we can wrap it up over here because it's exactly 3 o'clock. Okay, we have one last question. let's wrap it up with a question. I recently came across one job description which asked for knowledge in designing accessible PDF. Does WCAG apply to designing a PDF?
Yeah, it does. So WCAG, even though it's called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, it's not only for web. I mean, it's not only HTML. It's meant to be independent from technology. So you can have WCAG requirements for PDF documents. It's a bit less well defined how you technically do it, but there are other standards for this. But definitely, the short answer is yes. You can follow the WCAG standards for PDF also.
And we know a lot of organizations are uploading PDFs on their website to be a downloadable piece of content. So of course, they also have to be accessible. And for that, thank you all for joining us today. It was very pleasant to see so much engagement in the chat. We keep on encouraging all of you to reach out to us on our LinkedIn profiles or on our emails with everything else that we could explain you further, or we can spar ideas with you. Thank you so much for joining today live, and thank you so much for you, Lars, to help me out putting this webinar together.
Yeah, thanks, and thank you for letting me join your time here today. Have a nice day.
Have a nice one. Bye.